Hello and welcome to the very second episode of the Suibhne podcast. It is the Rabbit Hole episode 2, where we try and fail to stay on time and keep a schedule. And for the first 30 seconds or so, we don't actually know if we're live. You get that weird in-between phase when you don't actually know. Or it doesn't show up. Okay, there we go. I think we're live. That shows. Beautiful. The title in the top left is wrong. We're all learning together. All learning one step at a time. I spent a good half an hour trying to set this all up beforehand. Time wasted, I think, because I still got things wrong. Just gonna jump in, change that to number 2. Beautiful. Look at that. We have new artwork on screen. We have new episode on screen. It's all going great. It's all going fantastic. I had a listen of last week's episode, and the one thing I can confirm is that that was far too low in volume for my liking. If there happens to be anybody watching live, could you let me know if this is too loud? I think we've got one viewer. Don't you love that first few minutes of a live stream when nothing seems to be going right? And okay, well, on my playback that feels okay. So what are we talking about today? Today, we've got the Serbian Sacred Dynasty on screen. What you're seeing is some beautiful artwork by an artist called Ravignon, who does incredible work. She's also got her own YouTube channel, so check that out. Spelled Ravignon on screen there. And she does some history videos, some really great stuff. She's got a series on Quebec that she's working on at the moment. It is fantastic. And then she helped me draw this incredible picture of the Serbian Sacred Dynasty. The Serbs think that kings grow on trees. That's the conclusion that I've got to. They're just running around looking for kings, and kings grow on trees, and they're killing their kings, and the kings are killing each other. It's all very sad. And here we go. So what you're seeing is a recreation of something called the Nemanjić dynasty's family tree. And that family tree is not uncommon in, these European medieval dynasties. They love their family dynamics, and they love their artworks on things like cathedrals and monasteries and all that jazz. And they painted this, I think this one in particular, this one is maybe on the Patriarchate of Peć building, which is in Kosovo, which is a lot of fun. It's a lot of controversy. We'll maybe touch on that in today's episode or some other future episode. The Serbian Sacred Dynasty is this thing that in Serbian historiography, they're kind of obsessed with. If you look into Serbian paintings and Serbian artwork and Serbian stories and Serbian poetry and all this stuff, they come up quite a lot, these members of this dynasty. This is essentially what was once a ruling family from the Eastern Roman Empire who ruled a piece of land that is more or less contiguous with what is modern-day Serbia, Kosovo, parts of Montenegro, parts of North Macedonia, that sort of area. There was this sort of warlord-type early polity in Serbia's early history. And eventually out of that polity came a ruling family, one of the successive ones. there were a few. Who cares? We're talking about this one, right? These guys sort of end up trapped, shall we say. Last week, we spoke a little bit about the migration of the Serbs. Serbs had moved from the diminishing and crumbling Christian kingdoms that had been overtaken by the vastly expanding Ottoman dynasty, a new powerful force in the east, the Ottomans, the Ottoman Turks, an Islamic power that came to dominate the Eastern Roman Empire, finally put the last nail in its coffin, and start taking over bits and pieces of the Balkans. And the Serbs said, nah, this isn't for us, and they hightailed it into the Holy Roman Empire, the Catholic Empire of the Austrian Habsburgs, and they became refugees in that land. And to do so, they crossed the Danube, the border between these two realms, or essentially what was fought over at the time. The Serbs crossed a river. Lo and behold, a few hundred years later, I'm making a video about it. It's strange. It's strange how things happen. So last week we talked about the Serbs being caught between these two worlds. So before that, the Serbs were still caught between two worlds. They were still caught in this big overarching dispute between Catholics and Orthodoxy, which is this primary big denominational dispute that happened between the two largest branches of Christianity in the Middle Ages. And you have to sort of choose which one you were going to be loyal to. And, you know, sometimes it's a church by church thing. You know, you can have one church over here on that side of the river and another one on this side of the mountain and that valley. They're all differently inclined, and they decide one way or another which one they're going to support. The Catholic Church with the Pope, or the Orthodox Patriarch with the Patriarch in Constantinople. And this was a big deal. This organized the differences in these two separate churches, and people had to decide. Now, the way this sort of shook up was that you had these dynasties and these medieval families and warlords, and these, you know, you got medieval feudalism. European feudalism is happening at the time. They're all running around doing feudalism, being feudalistic and all that jazz, just having fun with swords and knights and all that rubbish. So they sort of end up being the deciders of which way, one way or another, they're going to go. Are we going to go Catholic or we're going to go Orthodox? And the Serbian leaders were pretty firmly in the camp of the Orthodox, with an asterisk. They occasionally would make overtures to the Catholic powers and to the Catholic leaders, to the Pope, all these, you know, trying to play for survival most of all. And the idea that they would be ultimately loyal to the Orthodox half of the church, the Patriarch, would eventually be the one that wins out in our retelling, in the Serbs' retelling of their own history. When the Serbs sat down and said, we're going to write everything down, we're going to collate all our records and see where we came from, they said, wow, you know, let's put a little narrative in here about how the Serbs were ultimately super loyal to the Orthodox Church, but not just the Orthodox Church. They were fiercely loyal to their own independent patriarchate. And a lot of that is happening in the video that I'm working on now. It's talking a little bit, you know, sort of focusing on how that structure took place and how that interferes with the dynastic disputes, and how the church in a way was used as this like political tool. There was no separation between like politics and religion. The two were very much one and the same. And that is something they inherited from these old Roman institutions, these religious institutions, where the emperor was seen as this, like, you know, blessed by God and saintly and you know, God's chosen representative on earth, and therefore is the head of the church. And the patriarch was sort of, like in a battle in and of itself. You had Caesaropapism, which means like Caesar above the Pope. It's saying who's really in charge. And for a lot of the Orthodox time, it was the dynastic representatives of the Holy Roman Empire. The Orthodox Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, as they are also known. They sort of win out in this overarching dispute between the church and the secular authority that they wielded. Because obviously the Roman Empire was built on blood, it was built on conquest, on the right of conquest, and it's got a really long history of its own. And then they sort of became this like Christian empire, and that carried on into the Middle Ages. So they decided, cool, we're going to be the heads of the church. And what ends up happening is that they lose a lot of their respect and power. They have continuity. They have a lot of continuity with the old Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire. And they decide that, they're going to be holding up that whole... they're going to have continuity with that empire. They're going to try their best to maintain that. That's like a really important constitution for their authority and why they should be rulers. And they have all these internal disputes mostly than external disputes. And eventually they start losing their power. And these medieval Slavic polities start gaining power. And the first of these to really gain a lot of power were the Bulgarians. The Bulgarians started... They were themselves a kingdom that was established from another of these Eastern steppe warrior dynasties that sort of swept in from, the steppes. I love talking about the steppes on my channel. It's this like super highway where all these horse warlords come, thundering on horseback down from the steppes. And they come and they establish Bulgaria. Cool. And they become Christians. Cool. And right around the same time, you've got all these Slavic migrants fleeing all the war and conquest, and they come and they settle in the Balkans. And the first major empire-like structure to form is the Bulgarians. And the Bulgarians are quite clever, because they say to themselves, look, we're never going to be taken seriously. We're never going to be taken seriously as the Byzantine Empire if we don't try and claim the same authority. We need to be truly big and powerful, and they conquer and they defeat the Byzantines in battle, and they defeat all their rivals in battle, and they're doing really well at setting up a state. But the problem is, when they convert to Christianity, they've got all these priests running around their kingdom who are not under their direct authority. They're under the authority of the Patriarch in Constantinople, and the Byzantines in Constantinople were their like main rivals. So they thought, well, why don't we just set up our own Patriarch over here in Bulgaria? So that's what they do. They set up their own Patriarchate, which was like the first Patriarchate to be established in like many centuries. Initially, you had just like 5, I think. Or initially it was just 3 and then it became 5. It's complicated. Who cares? Whatever. Let's stick to one rabbit hole. They get there were these 5 patriarchates. You had Rome, you had Constantinople, you had Jerusalem, you had Alexandria, and you had Antioch. And Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem had long since fallen to the Islamic caliphates of the time. So you had the Rashidun Caliphate, and you had another caliphate that came out of Egypt, I believe. Long since fallen out of the sphere of influence of greater Christendom at the time. So the ones you had left were Rome and Constantinople, and that became Catholic and Orthodox. You had these 2 patriarchates, two overarching authorities. So one hadn't been created, a new one hadn't arrived for a long time, many centuries. So the idea that the Bulgarians had to create their own new patriarchate was like very novel, very innovative, and they're coming up with the best ideas. They were in the lab, sitting around, mixing chemicals together, thinking, what can we do? What can we do to shore up our authority a bit better. Let's take all these priests that answer to the patriarch in Constantinople, this Greek Roman dynasty that we're trying to overtake and subsume their authority. Because at the time, like, if you look at a map of the first Bulgarian Empire, they're massive. They're really taking a lot of territory from these from the Romans, and they're conquering a lot of territory that these Roman Christians inhabited. So these new rulers come in, and suddenly, you're seen as this foreign outsider. Well, not anymore. Not if we get our own patriarchate and we claim this Christian authority. That's like really good. That's like great for you and your claim to power. Cool. That would help a lot, because submission at the end of the sword kind of gets you, doesn't, it has short-term results. It has short-term results to say, cool, we're going to obey you because you're really strong and you have a lot of swords and you know how to ride horse good and you know how to shoot arrow good. But eventually, people rise up. They decide they want to break away, and if you're a really strong ruler, then maybe your son is not as strong of a ruler, and maybe your son's son is not as strong of a ruler. Cool. There's a lot of personality involved here. Maybe we're going to break away in a little while. And one of the things that helps with that is if you have another form of authority. You have this sword in one hand and Jesus in the other hand, a Bible in the other hand, to say, hey, we're in charge. Cool. And who was in charge currently at this time? The Orthodox Patriarch in Constantinople. So, not a bad idea, really, if you think about it. Not a bad idea, not a bad way to go about things. Maybe legally speaking, questionable. Is it transferable? Is these patriarchates transferable? The answer to that question kind of ends up being yes, because it happened. It gets ingrained into the into legal precedent, into church precedent, and then everybody else that eventually ends up picking their own patriarchates sort of uses the establishment of this Bulgarian patriarchate as a precedent. The way legal precedent works in civil law and in church law is the way you point to decisions that are made in the past, and you sort of say, hey, well, they did it, why can't we? So the Bulgarians were this really, really powerful Balkan state, and they took over and they become this Christianized state. And one of the leaders of the Bulgarians, I can't remember which one, maybe Simeon, decides that he is going to do a full conversion of his empire, take all the different religions and make it a mostly Christian Orthodox empire. And he's going to crown himself Tsar, which is the root of that word is Caesar. You're going to take the title of the emperor. Now, the word Caesar or Kaiser, obviously, to people who know a little bit about Rome and the Roman Empire, it's kind of a loaded word. It was obviously originally a family name or a clan name that Julius Caesar had. And these Bulgarians, this Bulgarian dynasty that came originally from the steppes, from what is now like the Volga region of Russia, and probably earlier before that, I think they were like Turkic maybe. I can't remember exactly what their origins is. But they sort of plunder into Europe and they set up this dynasty, and they hear about Caesar or Kaiser. This is like a word that they know. But the emperor of Rome, you sort of have these different titles running around over the centuries. And technically the head honcho guy is not supposed to be Caesar. It's supposed to be the emperor. So you have a word like imperator or imperium in Latin. That's like the head guy. And then you have another word in Greek, which is essentially the same thing, which is like basilis or basilius. I can never remember how to pronounce it. And that was the head guy. And Caesar was almost supposed to be like a junior emperor. When the Roman Empire split into left and right, into Rome and Constantinople originally, centuries earlier, they decided, well, we're going to have two main guys, two emperors, and then two junior emperors. And those junior emperors were going to be named Caesar. So like, and another word for this is like Augusti. So Caesar Augustus started that. And he had his official title, as well as imperator, was Augustus. So you had Augustus, and that's technically the title that you take on as the head honcho, the sheriff, you know? And the second in command, or the deputy, was supposed to be the Caesar. But Caesar at the time was also like just this way more famous term. It was a term that you heard more often because it was present in many languages. The Germans, for example, just called the emperor Caesar or Kaiser. And when they interacted with the Germans, that's just the word that they used, the Bulgarians. And they decided, cool, we want to take Caesar. We want to be Caesar. We want to be the guy in charge. So the Byzantines were kind of doing a little sneaky. They were kind of doing a little sneaky sneak, saying, hey, sure, we'll recognize your new fancy powerful empire. We'll recognize you as emperors. But in reality, what they were recognizing them as was Caesar. It's all very complicated, you know? It's a bit of a rabbit hole, so to speak. And this sort of solved a legal problem because the Byzantines, the Eastern Romans, weren't really supposed to recognize other emperors. Now, that's kind of why the dispute happened in the first place. You've got a Holy Roman Emperor in the West who just called himself Roman Emperor, Imperator Romanum, you know, something like that. And you've got a guy in the East who's calling himself Basileus of the Romans, the Augusti, the ruler in charge. You've got two guys calling themselves sheriff. How does that work? So the Byzantines weren't really supposed to be recognizing any other claimant to that authority. So by recognizing the Bulgarians as Caesar, they were placating the Bulgarians, placating their claims to being emperors, while at the same time, on their side of the thing, they're like laughing. They're like, oh, no, we know what's up. We know who's the real king in charge around here. You know? The real sheriff in town, that's us. Cool. And they probably thought they were pretty clever. So you got clever people in Bulgaria, clever people in the Roman Empire, in the Byzantine Empire. And they're like fierce enemies. The Serbs sort of take a lot of note. They take a lot of note about what these Bulgarians are up to. And they get quite strong. They are trapped in this halfway world themselves. They're trapped between the Byzantines on one side and the Holy Roman Empire on the other side. And then you got these newcomers, the Bulgarians. It's like, well, there's a bunch of sheriffs in town now. What do we do? And they sort of, you know, just kind of live and try and placate the newcomers as best they can. The problem with Serbia, though, if you look at a map, Serbia has got this sort of very mountainous, hilly south. And its north is very open and flat. And open, flat land, that's really easy for any horse-based empire to use. They're gonna raid that land with horses and go gangbusters on the inhabitants. And the inhabitants, the Serbs at the time, which, you know, weren't just like Serbs, you know, that ethnic identity is quite a new one, but you had basically all these Slavic people who sort of had to flee into get away from them, and they largely did so. Them, the Vlachs as well as like other Roman people, so like Greek speaking people, medieval Greek speaking people. They end up becoming really good at being, you know, mountain dwelling warlords. That's sort of the earliest stages of the Serbs, and they're kind of doing really well. That's like how they set up their polity. You know, if you look at like ancient, or sorry, not ancient, but like medieval ruins from this era in Serbia, you see you see a lot of these like hill forts and ringed fortresses, ringed by these big stone walls, controlling passages through the valleys. So if you're moving south and north and you're carrying an ox cart full of apples and you want to go sell your apples, and you sort of have to pay tax to whoever's in charge. And the people in charge are the ones that can defend it the best, and the people that defend it the best are the ones that are building big ring forts and castles and that sort of all that jazz up in the hills. And that's how the Serbs get started. You know, that's how they made a Serbia. They all got together and they said, we're the Serbs and we're going to make a Serbia. So they made a Serbia. They're in charge, and they had these Župans. Župan is like a lord, basically, a warlord. It's a term that goes back to when they were essentially, you know, bands of warlords that sort of got together and decided to make alliances during their migration into the Balkans. That term Župan becomes like lord or baron, or, you know, you're in charge basically of this little piece of land around your castle. And eventually you get overarching dynasties, you know, people that want to claim that authority. And then they decide, we're going to be loyal to the Eastern Romans. They're going to be our guys because they have the authority. They're the ones that let us in. They're the ones who helped us out. Beautiful. There's this famous story about how, who was it? Emperor Theodosius, maybe. I could be getting my timelines wrong. But one of the emperors is said to have given the Serbs like a plot of land and said, here, come on and settle here. You can be my federati. You can be my legally recognized band of warriors, and you can protect the frontiers. You can protect Rome's frontier from all the other barbarians. You're a good barbarian, and there's the bad barbarians over there. You protect us, and you can have this land. This is probably drawing on at least a little bit of truth. That's kind of how these bands of warriors were recognized. But it is also pretty suspicious, because when it's kind of like if you get like a letter of recommendation from somebody, like that's like your claim to authority, like having a cop badge or something. That's like your symbol. That's like why you're in charge, is because you've got a cop badge. Cool. That also makes a market for like forging that, and forging a letter of recommendation, or forging a police badge, whatever. And so the oldest records of this interaction that they had with the Roman Empire comes like many centuries later. Now, that doesn't mean that it didn't happen, but it might have been sort of smaller contractual agreements that sort of got mythologized. And when it came time to write this all down, that sure would be beneficial. It sure would be convenient, very convenient, to have a letter of recommendation from the Roman emperor to say, hey, here's a contract. You can sit down here and you can build a nice ring fort and you can be in charge. That would sure be convenient if you were trying to claim that you had the legal right to be there. And so maybe that's something that happened, and maybe there's a bit of truth to it, who knows. But that's kind of the fun part about history, is that you get to sort of see the little cracks in the story. You start to see, well, did you really get that letter? Did you really sign this contract? Or did like one of your cousin's friends maybe have like an agreement written out on a napkin to say, hey, you know, can you please use your sword to like protect me for like a day, and maybe I'll pay you for it? And maybe that's the contract you're referring to. Maybe something like that. So the emperor is a big part in this story. It's about like saying, hey, no, like we had a deal. We had a deal. We can be here. Cool. But what ends up happening is that now you sort of need to fulfill your part of the bargain as the new Serb rulers. You need to support the emperor. You need to be on the emperor's side, and you need to listen to the emperor. And when he calls you to arms, you have to go to arms. Cool, that's great. But like, maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to do your own things and have your own politics and do other sorts of things, which medieval rulers do, you know, as they are wont to do, as are we all want to do. Who doesn't want to be a medieval ruler and just live out your life and not listen to anybody? I don't want no Byzantine emperor telling me what to do. I just want to live my life, you know? That truly is the dream. Anyway, so they decide, eventually these Serbs decide, let's do a little bit of politicking and see if we can't find somebody else. So what are your options? You've got the Holy Roman Empire to the west of Serbia, and then directly to the east of Serbia, you've got this new Bulgarian Empire. So these are two potential allies. If you could maybe play these three emperors, as it were, off of one another and sort of command your loyalty command the loyalty of these emperors ad hoc, as it were, to sort of be friendly with one. A friend of my friend is my friend, and friend of my enemy is my enemy, blah, blah, blah. That kind of thing. And subsequent Serbian rulers decide which way they want to go with this stuff. And like I was saying before, the church was wrapped up in this. Because not only are you sort of agreeing to follow somebody into battle, you're not just talking about that. You're talking about, like, who's going to be in charge of the church. In many ways, the people that have the most influence over your population over time, you know, it's arguable that that's like a far more important thing to have control over in a lot of ways. Because you're meeting with you're meeting at church every week or so, that kind of thing. The church is involved in your life, and it depends who your church leaders decide they want to be loyal to. This was a problem that the Serbs had. They found themselves caught between these two worlds, and they decided eventually that the history they were going to record of themselves was going to say, nah, we were super loyal to the Orthodox half of the empire, of the continent. We were super loyal to them from the beginning. We were always holding the torch for the Constantinople patriarch. We were great subjects, honorable and disciplined, and we always answered the call to arms whenever we needed to fight for our faith and fight for our emperor. Which is a load of horseshit. They did not do that. They constantly betrayed the emperor. They constantly warred against him. They constantly allied themselves with powerful German rulers and Italian rulers and Bulgarian rulers. This is the foundation of their existence. Like, you can't just sort of pledge yourself willy-nilly to just one emperor and let that be it. No. This is politics. You gotta be doing some clever politicking, and maybe you roll the dice and you're winning. You gambled on the right horse, and sometimes you lose your head. You know, sometimes you die or you get imprisoned or that kind of thing. The Byzantines loved maiming people. That's like one of their favorite things to do. They see a traitor and they're like, I gotta maim that traitor. And the idea was, you know, you if you're maimed, that's like hard to ignore that you don't have the emperor's approval anymore. Nobody's reading anything. Like, nobody's reading the daily Byzantine newspaper. You don't get like a bulletin with all the things that happened that day and all the people that the emperor or the patriarch excommunicated. No, you see an emperor, you hear about it, your local ruler gets blinded, you know, or had his something chopped off, like a hand or they loved blinding. That was like their favorite thing. They loved blinding traitors. So sometimes they would go to war with a rebellious Serbian ruler or whomever it happened to be, and they would end up blinding them and saying, this means you no longer have authority. This means you no longer have a say in our... You're no longer part of our thing, whatever. So the Byzantines, had this like on again, off again relationship with the Serbs, and the Serbs have always claimed, no, we've been good. We've been good since the beginning. And that's kind of the long and roundabout way that we get back to this painting, because this is very much exemplifying. Exemplary. It is an example of that view that the Serbs have of themselves, and the view that they would very much like you to believe. And when I say Serbs, I mean Serb historians, Serb historiographers, revisionism and revisionist history. All history is revisionist history. I am aware that term sometimes gets thrown around as like a weird, like a historical academic slur to call it revisionist or revisionism. All history is revisionism. That's what history is. That is how it works. So the Serb historians of the Middle Ages were very keen on propagating the idea that no, we're good. We're true, loyal subjects, and that is why we had to break away and form our own patriarchate, and it's why we had to break away and form our own imperial dynasty. I shit you not. That is basically, in a nutshell, the story of the Serb sacred dynasty. They took all of this long centuries of feuding and trapped in between these two worlds and these several major powers, and they decided, hey, that means we get to form our own independent empire and be the true successor of the Roman Empire, because clearly we're so loyal to Rome. We're so loyal to Rome that we are in essence just the real Romans. Those Romans over there in Constantinople, they're not the real Romans. We're the real Romans. That's how loyal to Rome we are, which is a hilarious story. It really is, and it's like so easy to poke holes in it, but of course that's the bit that survives. That's the part that survives, and people do poke holes in it. There would have been contemporaries alive when this stuff was going on that would have poked holes in this claim. But in many ways, you don't get to see those parts a lot of the time, because it's not the part that survives. The part that survives is the fun story and the beautiful paintings on the sides of monasteries. Serbian rulers started becoming really into building monasteries and churches and that sort of thing. Abbots and abbesses, and they figured that this was a good way to ensure their own legacy. They would they would spend their lifetime building a monastery, and then the idea was that was going to be their endowment. I can't remember the Serbian word for it, but let's say it's an endowment. You spend your life during your rule funding the construction of a monastery or several, or helping repair an old monastery. And you are building a new identity for yourself. You have this like literal thing that you get to be remembered by, made out of stone. People die and they get buried and then they rot and their corpse goes away. But buildings stick around for a lot longer. So it's not hard to see why they would spend a lot of time and money, exploiting serfs and their labor to produce a economic surplus for which they would enrich themselves, and use that economic surplus to hire people and architects to build big, beautiful, gorgeous monasteries, and then painters, hire some talented painters to go in and paint a beautiful fresco on the side and on the inside. It's all very politically motivated and legacy motivated. It's not cynical by any means. It's not like a cynical thing. It's just something they did. It's something that all European monarchies to some extent were doing. It's how they held on to their authority, and how they would make sure that their family's authority would remain their family's authority. Because, like it or not, the longer you have that authority, the less people are supposedly going to die, because then you don't have a succession dispute. and a interdynastic war. It's all very complicated. The Middle Ages are very complicated. You know, somebody should write a book about it. I think just call it "The Middle Ages Are Complicated, Bro." Anyway, so this little rabbit hole is about the Serbian sacred dynasty. So what is that? What is a sacred dynasty? And how did it happen? So you have all these Serbian rulers who are getting pretty powerful by playing off their more powerful neighbors. They're entering into wars, and they're trying to get the best deal possible in the peace. You know, they're fighting or allying themselves interchangeably with the Central European dynasties, the Holy Roman Empire, and all of its adjacent parts. So that's included with Italy and the Roman Pope. And on the other side, you have the Orthodox powers. You have the Bulgarian Emperor and the Byzantine Emperor. And you also have these other newcomers, which is from the steppes. You have the Hungarians. Now, earlier I was talking about how the top part of Serbia, the northern part of Serbia, is very flat and open and steppe-like. And it forms part of this thing called the Pannonian Plain or the Pannonian Basin or something like that. In come these Hungarian horse warlords, and they take over a big chunk of central Pannonia, and they form their own little empire, their own little medieval kingdom called Hungary. You know, in what is today Hungary. Lo and behold, I wonder if there's a connection. So they form this big kingdom, and they convert. They decide, every newcomer has to decide, okay, you're going to be Orthodox or you're going to be Catholic. They decide they're going to be Catholic because to their left is the Holy Roman Empire. To their to their west is the Holy Roman Empire, and they decide, cool, we're going to be Catholics, and we're going to create a big, powerful kingdom, and we're going to be the new players in town. So you got 4 players in town. You've got the Holy Roman Empire, which is like this German, Italian Catholic state. You've got the Hungarian Kingdom, which is another Catholic state. And then on the other side, you've got the Bulgarian Empire, which is the Orthodox state, and the Byzantines, the other Orthodox state. And the top part of Serbia is sort of mostly overtaken by this new Hungarian dynasty, the Arpads, and they form this, they take over a lot of that sort of Serbian area that the Serbs didn't really have a hold over to begin with. And this fresh new conflict sort of overtakes the Serbs. It overtakes their little ambitions. They've got they're ruling a very small part of a very mountainous territory, and it doesn't seem to be going like all that well. They haven't grown like they thought they would. But the other thing that's good about Serbia is that it's filled to the brim with metal and precious metals. It has got, it's got iron, it's got copper, it's got tin, or maybe not tin, but like it's got stuff that you need for war. So they start making deals with people to build mining towns and give them special privileges, and especially Germans. A lot of Germans come in, a lot of Saxons, I think, and people from sort of northern and eastern Germany come to Serbia, and they set up these towns, and a lot of these Vlachs come in, and they start trading with that, and they get really wealthy. The point of that is that they get really wealthy. I'm oversimplifying a lot of stuff here because it's Friday and I'm tired, and they just got wealthy, and wealth is great because now you've got something that the powers want, and it's something that you can sort of use to your benefit. So Serbia ends up being this kind of like pet almost of the Hungarians. They become very intertwined with the Hungarian kingdom. A lot of their nobility, so these Zhupans and these like warlords and stuff, they get very intertwined into the Hungarian nobility. A lot of Hungarian nobles get land in what is now Serbia, A lot of Serbian nobility get land in what is now Hungary. They're marrying into each other's families. They're forming these dynastic connections, occasionally warring with one another over those dynastic connections. There's a reciprocal give and take sort of feudalistic medieval thing happening. It's a medieval feudal soup just sort of simmering away and connecting these two sort of burgeoning dynasties, the Hungarian dynasty and the Serbian dynasties. And the Serbs get quite wealthy and they start establishing themselves, and eventually wealth leads to power, and they start taking over other bits of territory. They start taking over a lot of these former bits of land that used to be very loyal to the Byzantine emperor. You have what is today sort of places like Albania, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Bosnia. They're growing, they're getting bigger, they're getting more established. And then along comes this guy, Stefan Nemanja. He is this brutal medieval ruler, and he expands the Serbian kingdom, or the Serbian principality. I can't remember what it was at the time. He expands it a lot at the expense of the Bulgarians and the Byzantines especially. Getting really powerful, and the more territory you take over, you know, you're incorporating new feudal land into your kingdom. You're getting more wealthy. You're controlling more trade routes. You're controlling more peasantry. It's all adding to your material gain. It's a material benefit to you as the Serbian ruler. And eventually, he has a bit of a crisis of faith. He thinks to himself, "Oh, I'm so brutal. I'm so terrible." And this is a very mythologized version of what happened. Who knows what happened? That's history 101. Who knows what happened? We don't know what happened, but this is the story that survives. As he goes, "Oh, poor me. I'm such a terrible person, and I've shed so much blood. And, you know, I'm supposed to be God's representative as a king, as a monarch." And the way they became monarchs in the first place is like such a hilarious, you know, story about how, initially they were trying to secure themselves in this war that the Byzantines were having with the West, and they're making overtures to crusading armies. So the Central European powers, the Hungarians, the French, the Germans, the English, they're all going on crusade into the Holy Land. They're going to what is now Palestine, Israel, that sort of area. They're going there to take back the Holy Land, to take back Jerusalem from the infidels, the Muslims. And these are all lands that the Byzantines once ruled, and the Byzantines really wanted it back. So they called on the West, and the West comes along with big crusading armies. And some of these armies, they pass right through Serbia, and the Serbs are being hilarious, going, "Oh, hello, you great noble warriors, you're fighting for God." They make these like hilarious bow down, prostrating themselves before these crusading armies to try and sort of win themselves more independence. Like, yeah. Oh, we were loyal to the Orthodox part of the empire the whole time. Yeah, right. Okay. It's just such a hilarious way that they played the sides off of one another. And, you know, the Normans especially. The Normans were coming in there with this like fierce European, French family, not just family, but this like polity that existed, sort of northern France, and they were getting really, really powerful and getting really, really good at being knights and warriors and conquering territory, and they were conquering bits of pieces of Italy, which is sort of close to the Balkans, and they were seeing how weak the Byzantines were during their crusading time, and they wanted to take over bits of the Balkans too, and the Serbs tried to ally with the who are they again? The Normans. It's all very take advantage of the situation that you've got. To take advantage of anybody who comes through there with a sword. It's all very hilarious at how badly they wanted to make new friends, basically. And one of the things that they did during one of these wars, I can't remember which one, but like they decide that they're going to reach out to the Pope and say, "Hey, Pope, can I be king, please?" And the Pope says, yeah, well, all you have to do is recognize my authority, and you have to be Catholic, and it'll all be grand. And the king, the prince at the time, who was it? Stefan the First crowned. So Stefan the First crowned. I'm just going to do a quick Google. Stefan the First crowned. Yeah, so Stefan the First crowned in 1217. Sends a letter to the Pope, and he says, can I please be king? The Pope says, sure. And he sends a guy, because that's how you did it back in those days. They didn't have Twitter. They send a guy with a piece of paper, and they say, can you go give the Serbian ruler Stefan a crown? And he goes, off he goes. In the meantime, the Pope dies. So, like, technically his authority isn't real anymore, according to some legal precedents. Like, if the Pope is dead, then anything he did, like any action that was taken at his word after that is supposed to be null and void, according to some people. Other people say no, like if he said it when he was alive, then it stands. So you can imagine which one the Serbs decided to believe. They decided to believe, Stefan Nemanja. You can tell that he decided, no, I think that makes me king. So he becomes king. And the issue with this is that story is kind of disputed. Did Stefan actually get crowned by the papal legate, or did he get crowned by an Orthodox priest instead, a Orthodox archbishop instead? This is a really funny sort of disagreement that the historical record has. Who gave Stefan his crown? Was it the papal legate with his piece of paper coming along and getting given a crown basically by the Catholic Pope? You know, this is like your enemy, right? Like, yeah, you're being friendly with them for short-term gain, but like taking a crown from the Catholic Pope, that's like sacrilege, you know? So did that happen, or did Stefan get crowned by somebody else named Sava, who is his brother, I think? Yeah, Stefan the First crowned. Now I'm thinking I'm messing up my time. Who cares? I don't know exactly who it was at any given stage, but the Serbian kings get established with Serbian kings get established. They get their own little kingdom, and nobody can tell whether or not it was the Serbian. Okay, no, I am remembering this correctly. So he's got his brother, or yeah, it's his brother. So he is the son of the previous guy, the previous king, his predecessor. I was just looking stuff up. So yeah, okay. So his father was named, confusingly, Stefan too. So we had a Stefan who was complaining. He's the character I was talking about before. He was the guy that said, oh, woe is me, I'm such a powerful ruler, but I've shed so much blood. He decides, I'm going to go and give up my crown. I'm going to give up my princely crown, because he was just a prince. He was a grand prince at the time. That was their title, which is like Grand Jupan, you know. I'm going to give up my crown, and I'm going to go be a monk. And my wife, my queen, prince, whatever title she had, she's going to go become a nun. We're going to go and we're going to be dedicating ourselves. And they take themselves off to a famous site of religious monasticism called Mount Athos. Mount Athos is a community, well, it's a mountain range on a little peninsula in Greece. And he takes himself off there because this is a famous place for the Orthodox Church. All these Christian monasteries exist there and have existed there for a long time. and he decides, I'm going to go there and I'm going to pour a lot of money into it, and I'm going to dedicate myself to God, because his son was already there and had already dedicated himself. His son was named Sava. That wasn't his original name. I can't remember what his original name was. Like Radoslav, maybe. Saint Sava, who are you, sir? I've been working on this video for so damn long that I've forgotten all the... Okay, so his name was Rashko, and he was born, and he was the last son of Grand Prince Stefan. He was the last son, and being the last son in any European dynasty kind of sucks, because you're basically last in line to inherit the throne, and you're also not necessarily going to get any sort of inheritance. You're like the spare of the spare. You need a job to do. A lot of people, a lot of these last-born sons, they decide, I'm going to go and seek a higher calling. I'm going to go dedicate myself to God. And they go and they become a priest, or they go to a monastery and they become a monk, or they go to a seminary. You know, they're gonna go the other way. Instead of secular power, they're gonna look for another form of spiritual endowment and meaning in life. So off he had gone to Mount Athos, and he sends his dad a letter. He says, "Oi, Dad, you've shed so much blood, and you've created a big, peaceful-ish kingdom, principality. You should give up your crown now and spend what little time you have left here with me in Mount Athos and become a monk, and spend the rest of your life paying money to the monasteries and the monastic communities to do penance for all the blood you've shed in God's name." And that's something that obviously the story says weighed heavily on the Grand Prince. Daddy Grand Prince, getting old, looking at himself in the mirror, thinking, "Oh, it's terrible. What a terrible life I've lived. It all weighs so heavily on my shoulders. I'm going to take off my princely crown, and I'm going to put on some new fancy robes, and I'm going to go to Mount Athos, and I'm going to go spend a bunch of money there." So he does. And that immediately causes a succession dispute, because not only did he have a son, he had like 3 sons or 4 sons, I can't remember, and they immediately start fighting one another. And the eldest was very pissed off at Daddy Monk, because he had been sidelined. He had been disinherited earlier on because him and Daddy had problems. They had issues between themselves, and they had disagreements. And publicly, Stefan Nemanja, he decided, "No, you're not going to be my successor. I'm going to instead give the crown to your second brother, my second son, Stefan, who even has my name. He is... I choose him over you. You can go elsewhere." And of course, this kind of stuff happens all the time in medieval Europe. And he gets really pissed off. So Daddy Monk dies, and a war happens between the other brothers. So Saint Sava, who gained the name, he used to be called like Rashko, as I was saying before. He gains the name because when you become a monk, you get a new name, and it's usually like to honor some other saint or some other monk or whatever. So he gets the name Sava, which is great for him because it's the name of the river that flows through Serbia. It is this very important river in the Balkans. And he wasn't technically named after that. Like, he was named after something else. He was named after a saint called Sabas or something, like a really older one. We have somebody in the live chat, Abdullah the Goat. How's it going? We're talking about the Serbian sacred dynasty. You're like the first person in the live chat of this brand new and very well-themed podcast. We're doing really well. So he was named after Sabas or something. I don't remember the exact details of the story. So he wasn't even really named after the river that was so important, but this becomes like really important in retrospect, because it's like this beautiful, important economic river that runs through Serbia, and he becomes this like Saint Sava eventually, which is kind of a spoiler because that's kind of what this whole dynasty is about. He decides, okay, my brothers are fighting over the throne, they're fighting over the crown, let's all get along, and he decides to come back to Serbia, and this is when that whole crowning dispute happens, because Stefan the First crowned technically got his crown from the Pope, which is the sacrilegious thing to do. So there's another story, another historical record that claims, no, it was actually Sava, his brother, that crowned him, which is very convenient and would be very good to paper over that inconsistency. And I think that whole thing is very funny. I love seeing these contradictions in the historical record. It gives me great joy. So along they come, and they've set up this new kingdom. And this is the kingdom that has been brought forth. On the bottom of the screen, in the middle, you can see Stefan Nemanja. Stefan the First, the Grand Prince of Serbia. That is him at the bottom of this family tree with the robes. Daddy Monk. And above him, growing out of him, out of his hands, out of his endowment, out of his holy hands, is all of these descendants of his that became part of his dynasty. So Nemanjić means like son of Nemanja, so that becomes the Nemanjić dynasty. They were the first grand princes, and then they eventually became kings. And again, spoiler alert, they will eventually become emperors. They are going to follow the example of the Bulgarians, and they're going to say, we want our own independent church. So Saint Sava is this first, he becomes the first archbishop or metropolitan, which just means, you're in charge of this piece of land, this one specific part of where the Orthodox Church's authority goes. You're in charge of that bit over there, and that becomes this like independent Orthodox piece, and because the Serbs are so good at being Roman, they're so good at like holding onto that Roman authority, they just had to do it, They had to do it. They were like, their hands were tied. There was all this open church land just going to waste over here, and we just needed to take over it and become the archbishops and the metropolitans. So with that authority as the archbishop, he technically crowns his brother. At least that's one of the conflicting resources we have on this. And maybe every monarch after that is crowned by the archbishop. And eventually the archbishop decides that that they're going to be even higher. They're going to establish a patriarchate like the Bulgarians did before them. They're going to do this new thing of a new patriarchate. And the emperor is going to be the new Tsar. So, of this royal family, you can see on screen right now. Let's see if I can move it. I'm very bad at streaming. Up we go. You've got all these new established kings that form part of this dynasty, and queens and regent princes and Orthodox metropolitans or bishops. And eventually, one of them decides, I'm going to be emperor. I'm going to give myself the title emperor. And his name was Dusan. And I don't actually know. I've never properly looked at this image to figure out who is who in the family tree. I think they're all slightly difficult and ambiguous to tell. I'm sure there is some expert out there who knows. But eventually you get this guy, Dusan the Mighty. He crowns himself Tsar. And this is the Serbian Empire. This is their dreams are now been fully realized. They have been building a big, beautiful kingdom, and now they've crowned themselves emperors or Tsar, Caesar, that sneaky word that we were talking about earlier. And I think that whole thing is quite funny. It is also very important to the Serbs. They have this authority invested into them. And you can see just above the whole tree is the man himself, the big J, Jesus, whose hands are outstretched. And he is sending forth his angels, carrying crowns, delivering them to the heads of the members of the Nemanjić dynasty. Retroactively, at some point, those first two members, Sava and his father, Daddy Monk, Stefan, become sainted into, that's called canonizing. They get canonized as saints into their branch of Orthodoxy. It was considered that they did so much for the church, and they did so much for the Serbs, and they did so much for Christendom and Christianity in general, that they were going to be canonized as saints. What happens when a saint is made out of an ancestor of a ruling family is that the Serbs start writing about this dynasty as if it were itself saint-like. The whole family tree is saint-like all of a sudden because it was born out of this marriage between the church and the monarchy, this royal dynasty, this royal family and the church. This same family, this Nemanjić family, these blood relatives who have incredible secular power and incredible religious power. In many ways, they're marrying the two, church and state, better than their predecessors, better than the Bulgarians, better than the Eastern Romans. They're doing what the others sort of pretend to do, because that's kind of that authority largely rests on like tradition and this like ancient heritage, an ancient Roman heritage at the end of a sword. The Nemanjić family, the Serbian dynasty, starts to look far more like it does what it says on the tin, much better than those empires. And that's what they think about themselves, and that's how they start to think about their own history. Because, of course, this golden era of the Nemanjić family does not last. We discussed last week in our episode on the Serb migrations that this dynasty eventually falls, and they fall to the Turks. They fall to these newcomers, the Muslim dynasty. And this is seen as like a major tragedy. It's seen as this horrible thing, this lamentable loss, akin to the biblical stories of the destruction of the temple. All this poetry is written in retrospect, talking about the Sacred Dynasty like it was the House of David, which is a famous dynasty in the Bible. And all this poetry and all this tradition is sort of taken, lamenting the loss of this dynasty like it was the most special and amazing thing that had ever existed. It was God's restoration of authority on earth. It mattered so much to them. And the reason why it mattered so much to them is precisely because it fell. It fell to the Ottomans. And what happens is this gilded idea, this gilded sort of rose-tinted glasses to look back on this golden age is what sort of creates the myth of the Serbian sacred dynasty. You know, did the rulers themselves at the time that they were living inspire as much? You know, did the ground turn to gold when they walked on it? You know, did the ground beneath their feet, you know, spring up bountiful, lush riches? No, not at all. Like, almost certainly not. They almost certainly would not have been much, if any, different to any other kingdom around them. But they had to look back on this thing as this lamentable, horrible loss. Because that's the thing with constitution. That's the thing with like legal precedent, is when you set yourself up as being like, we are the correct and rightful rulers, and we know that because X, Y, and Z. We know that because we have established this like beautiful big thing, and we got the letter of recommendation from the emperor, and we've defeated our enemies, and we defeated the infidels, and we've always been loyal to the church, and we've always been, this sacred thing, and our members of our dynasty were paying for these beautiful monasteries and creating cults of personality around them. That becomes the myth that they were this lost golden age. They were to be lamented, and they would be to be mourned. And then when you have all of that, when you have all of that idea that this is the reason why we're in charge and this is the reason why we have this authority, it kind of ties you to that. You're kind of inseparable from that now. If you have all this divine authority, you're going to say, okay, well, we fell. Why did we fall? Well, it must have been in God's plan, and we must get it back one day. And they started having like prophecies, like legit prophecies. You look into like Serbian literature that came after this time, and they're writing it the same way biblical prophets wrote about the restoration of the Davidic dynasty and the Davidic period. They're writing in a restoration prophesied to come, and it is intently meaningful to the Serbian identity, intently meaningful to who they are and who they see themselves to be within the historical record. It's all very fascinating. I've enjoyed it so much, and I've enjoyed learning about it so much, and that in essence becomes the beginning of their myth. I mean, obviously it's not the beginning, and they sort of collated over time, but they're a stateless people when the Ottomans come through, and as a stateless people, they're gonna write down stories and poetry and songs about the times when they weren't a stateless people. And what better time to write about than the sacred dynasty? So you have all this mythology that comes out of it as well. So all these stories about actions and deeds of each individual king at each individual time. It's all essentially fiction, but a lot of it is sprinkled in with real folklore and stuff that had a nugget of truth. The way any folklore spreads is that you sort of have a nugget of truth or a foundation upon which to build, whether that be the oral tradition, whether that be something else. And they sort of build off of that and create songs, and then the songs inspire poetry and vice versa. And one of the ways that they sort of spread these songs was through like this one stringed instrument that they would sit on the side of a mountain and sing poetry to, this epic, beautiful, beautiful poetry. And this poetry sort of inspired an epic cycle, sort of, akin to the epic cycles of all that had come before them. And this is like partly deliberate, right? It's not just all this organic thing. It partly is deliberate because it helps you cling on to what you had lost, and it helps you try and stay in connection and keep together. Because all these Serbs had fled, right? They fled abroad into the Holy Roman Empire, into the Habsburg realm, and they had to stick together somehow. And that's sort of a big topic of the video that I'm working on, and what we can maybe talk about next week, or we can talk about something else. So if you wanna leave a comment below the video and also give it a like, that would be great. Tell me what you want to talk about in the next episode. The other show that I'm working on is not quite ready. We haven't quite edited that yet, but soon it'll come out. So make sure you subscribe and hit the little bell notification to keep notified about when I go live and when new episodes of the podcast are going to be coming out. So let's talk a bit of housekeeping. If you want to support the channel, the best way to do that now is through Patreon or become a member on the main channel. Right now, this channel is still not monetized. As you can see on the top right there, we have subscribers. I've got a little counter there happening. We need to get to 500 subscribers before this channel can be monetized, and then there's some other things we need to do to get a bunch of watch time, and who cares about all that. For now, let's just keep that little subscriber thing, that goal there. If you're watching this and you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Chuck us a subscribe, will ya? And if you want to support it in another way, you can just leave a comment and share the video, share the stream. And eventually I'm gonna once I've got a few of these under my belt, I'll set up a podcast feed if you want to listen to this on another app of your choice, whether that be a podcast player or Spotify or something else. Yeah. Once that happens, once the channel gets monetized, you'll be able to do things like super chats. I'm a little bit annoyed that the live chat isn't showing up on screen right now. I don't know how to fix that. I'm terrible at streaming, but I'll figure it out next time. And we'll talk about something hopefully more interesting than the Serbian Sacred Dynasty, which I found incredibly interesting. Your mileage may vary. This dynasty, this family tree, is such a beautiful, beautiful drawing. And if you ever have the chance, if you ever are able to check out, oh, there it goes. The live chat appeared on screen. Hello, Abdullah. If you're ever able to visit an Orthodox monastery in Serbia, check out the awesome frescoes. I think they are very gorgeous. I've not been myself, but the research that I've done into them is truly blew me away. The level of artistry and the style. It's a very like marriage style between East and West. It's got these beautiful frescoes. A lot of them have worn away in time, and some of them are much better preserved, and they're really gorgeous. And they sort of show the Serbs in their best light. The view that they'd have of themselves, of Serbian historians would have of themselves, and the Serbian church. It is very, very bygone era. It gives the feeling of this like terrible, tragic loss, because that's how they thought of it for a long time. It was this like very sad thing that they thought about to themselves. Poems that they used to like tell their kids about the dynasty, that they would, oh, there's this terrible thing that happened. We were once mighty rulers, and we lost that mighty dynasty. It mattered a lot, and it didn't have to be an accurate story for it to matter. That's how folklore works. That's how poetry works, and it's how, in a large way, it's how history itself works. And with that beautiful piece of poetic philosophy, we're going to end the stream there. Thank you all so much for watching the second episode. Thank you for coming down the rabbit hole with me. Be sure to do all those things, liking and subscribing. Enjoy your Friday. See you next time.